Hello, welcome to Artisan Stitch. This is Jen again. Today's tutorial is from my Beyond Basics series of dressmaking technique tutorials. The subject of today's class is this shirt cuff with continuous bound placket and the little cuff. So this would be the right cuff. So that the fastening would be on the back of the arm. So what you would have is your shirt sleeve. This is only a section. I use scaled down samples here for filming, but this would be what the bottom of your shirt sleeve would look like. So I've transferred the markings using a wash-off pen onto my fabric. You will also have a piece of the binding. This is your continuous bound placket, just a little strip of fabric. This would be part of your pattern, and you'd have a shirt cuff, obviously two shirt cuffs. I've applied interfacing to half of mine, so this is going to be the piece that sits on the inside of the cuff. Sometimes I find when you apply interfacing, it slightly affects the way that the fabric looks on the outside. So I always prefer to put my interfacing on the under layer, which is going to be inside the garment. So having prepared all that, let's get started. So the first thing is to make my tucks in the sleeve. So I've prepared all my pleats. So I'm going to take one little tuck and match it to its partner dots, like so. And you could do this on the iron, in which case you can press your pleats in straight away. I'm just going to pin mine down. And on the second pair, so you just pinch along, lift up. Now your pattern would have arrows telling you which direction to meet the pleats, and they would of course go on opposing directions on each arm. Right, now I'm going to take these and give these a quick press. And I'm going to come back and machine tack them in place. Okay, so you could choose to do a row of tacking parallel to the lower edge of the sleeve, or even two rows, so one at the bottom, one higher up. I think I'm going to just sew down each pleat. So I've selected a larger stitch. I'm not going to do any reversing. Let's take it close to the edge and just a few lines, maybe not as long as that, about there, just a few stitches to hold these in place. And of course today I'm using a strongly contrasting thread colour, just for the benefit of the camera, but you would probably be using a close match. Whether for your tacky thread or your regular sewing thread. Okay, there we go, that's it held in place. So now I'm going to tackle the continuous bound placket itself. So my placket is twice as long as my proposed opening on the sleeve. It's about 4 centimetres wide, which is about 1.5 inches. So I've prepared it by marking 6 millimetres or 1/4 inch line on the right side and folded on the other side. Again 6 millimetres or 1/4 inch folded towards the wrong side. Now I'm going to prepare my opening by stitching alongside. Now we're going to slash right down the centre here. I've marked my stitching line on. It's actually quite difficult to stitch a diagonal line. So again, right down to my regular stitch length. I'm actually going to turn down to a very short stitch length as I get nearer the point here. So I'm stitching about a thread's width away from the line. And I've turned my stitch down to 2 millimeters towards the bottom. Back down the other side. Okay, so I've tried to keep inside the drawn line. Now for the scary bit, I'm going to cut down as far as I can get. Now I think I may take this stitching out later if it's not covered up. That's as far as I can get. Right, so my placket, let's do this off the machine. So I've got my placket. I'm going to open let's do this right sides together and lay the stitch line along my drawn line. So sorry if you can't see for the backs of my hands. Go. This is very fiddly, hence this is why it's in my Beyond Basics course and not in the introductory dressmaking techniques one. The fabric I'm using today is 50-50 polyester cotton, which is your typical shirting weight. Right, so now I'm going to stitch right the way across. So I'm going to stitch out with the line I've previously stitched because I want this to be covered up. I'm still using a 2 millimeter stitch length. I'm going to do a little bit reversing at the beginning. I'll try and keep the needle on the left hand side of the stitching. Pins are a bit of a nuisance, keep having to stop to take them out, but they aren't very necessary. Now I've tried to pull the point of the cut flat, completely flat. And when I stitch across it, I don't want to stitch in any tucked fabric. So I'm pulling it open. one stitch at a time. Just move the rest of the fabric out the way as you go. Okay, so everything's caught in place. It's very delicate, but everything's caught in place and I'm quite happy, I think, with the point. So I'm going to go in there and press that seam. I'm going to give it a little bit of press as it is. Then I'm going to fold this over and tuck this under. So here we are back from the iron with the binding all folded and pressed to cover the raw edge. So there are 3 ways you could sew this. You could slip stitch it by hand. You could top stitch from this side along that edge. So that's called edge stitching when it's as close to an edge as that. So 1 or 2 millimeters away from the edge. I think I'm going to use my favourite method, which is stitch in the ditch. So if you haven't heard of stitch in the ditch, let me tell you how it's done. So you can do this for waistbands or, let's say, bias binding. This isn't bias binding, but it is basically binding. So I'm going to fold it over to cover the previous stitches, and I'm going to sew it from the other side. So this ditch here, caused by the previous stitching, I'm going to sew in there. Now you need to make sure that the edge you want to catch extends beyond this previous seam. So what I do is I just pin along in the seam or just to the side of it, making sure that I can feel the layer underneath. So once that layer's pinned down, I know if I stitch in the ditch, I'm going to be catching that layer in. Particularly around this bit, where it's, I don't want to go too far because I'm in danger of stitching a pleat into this little corner. So the needle is just running along your previously stitched edge, and again you've got to watch not to go over your stitching into your binding because it will show. Now stitching the ditch doesn't make much sense today when I'm using a contrasting fabric, contrasting thread, because it's going to jump out like a sore thumb, but if you were using a matching thread to your fabric, it just disappears. It's one of my favourite techniques, in fact. So you can get stitch in the ditch feet for most machines, which have a sort of bar and a guide, but I've tried one, I didn't find it particularly useful. So I just rely on having a keen eye. Having a peek underneath. So I'm rearranging all this fabric here. Notice I've left my needle in so it doesn't slip out of place. It's moving all this fabric. I don't want that to be caught. Hopefully I've not gone off the edge on the underneath layer. Just missed a tiny bit, but yeah, that's not bad. I've put it all the way along. There we go, so that's what Stitch in the Ditch does for you. Right, so I'm going to fix this bit, but what we're now going to do, that's just about our placket finished. Once I've given this a final press, we can fold this over and you can see how that's going to work. So yeah, I've not caught, I'm really pleased with that actually, I've not caught the fabric in. Once that's pressed, that little crease will come out. So I've not actually got a tuck of fabric in there. So your placket just folds back over on itself on the top. Obviously it's a bit longer than it needed to be, but better that. So this bit can just get cut off. And my tuck has held. You could actually sew the placket before you put the tucks in. There we go. So I'm going to give that a press now, and we'll move on with getting the cuff on. So to prepare the cuff, I've added interfacing. Now I've only put it on 1/2. You can put it on right the way across the whole cuff if you want. Make sure you use a quite soft one though. You don't want to make it too rigid. So I've added that to the non-notched side. That means this side's going to be sewn to the garment, this side's going to be folded over and will end up on the inside. As I say, I'm not a fan of having interfacing on the garment side. Then I've folded over my seam allowance from the long unnotched edge. So my seam allowance is 1 centimetre or 3/8 in this case. And I folded the whole cuff in half, right sides together, and I'm going to sew down each end. Right, so off to the iron to press, trim, and we're going to turn that the right way out. So, quick press to melt the stitching. I'm going to snip the corners off. I'm going to grade the ends just to remove bulk from the edges, the inside edges. So this should be really an automatic process for internal pieces, all your internal seams. That means seams which end up inside a part of your garment. You want to just grade or layer is another word for it. Right, so we're going to turn those through. Again, we've got nice crisp corners, nice points in the corners. And a final press, flattening that seam with my fingers just to get it lying flat. There we go. Same for the other side. Again, this rolling finger technique really forces your seams open. Gives you a very crisp look if you're doing any tailoring type tasks like this one. And fold and press back along, folding our cuff back into half, but right sides out this time. Right, now we're ready to attach this to the shirt, or the sleeve, shall we say. Now we're ready to add the cuff to the sleeve. First thing you need to do obviously now is join the edges of the sleeve. So this is the underarm seam of the sleeve. So this is my first little sample. So just wanted to show you how the cuff is applied. The under part of the binding sort of points out the way, and that has this underlap. So this is a lapped cuff style, so it has an underlap, that's to hold the button. The inside part of the continuous binding gets tucked underneath, so you can see that when it closes, these two edges match, and the cuff goes on flush with this edge. So I'm going to start by pinning my cuff on to my sample here I'm working on today. I have off camera went away and joined the underarm seam. So I'm going to place it. So there we go, there's my binding there. So I'm going to take the cuff that I've prepared, right sides together. So I want to make sure this could fit inside the cuff, so there, and just match the raw edges. So I've left myself a 10mm or 3/8 seam, but you would use whatever was recommended on your pattern. So there's our plates, which are now going to get held into place. So notice this bit of the cuff is going to get folded out the way, so it's just the raw edge that I'm pinning on. And there's our notch, just about matching. Remember, this is the edge which is going to protrude from the sleeve. So we've got a little bit of our lapped edge sticking out. So I normally put my pins in that way, so I'm just going to move them. And actually pinning down, this is the plate, so I might put one here to hold this plate in place too. And just again, make sure this is tucked and it's lining up with the edge of the cuff. There's the seam of the cuff. Right, I can go ahead and sew that now. It doesn't matter if you want to stitch from the cuff side or the sleeve side. I'm going to stitch from the cuff side today, I think. So, cuff facing up. Again, because I'm working on such a small scale, it's very fiddly. A normal size garment wouldn't be quite as tricky as this. Checking I don't have something caught in underneath. Right, done. Okay, so again, I'm going to go and give that a little press. I've got quite a few layers in some places, so I'm going to trim some of my layers out. But you can see we've already pre-prepared this edge of the cuff. So once we've given this a quick press, we can just take, fold over the rest of the cuff, everything folds inside. And we're going to finish off the cuff. But let's go up to the iron. So ironing along the seam I've just done. Setting the seam or melding. Then I think I'm going to press it from the outside. I'm going to get my sleeve board. There we go. Sleeve board is a really great invention. and a good investment for all your narrower little nooks and crannies. There we go, that means I can get the whole sleeve right round. It's just a little mini ironing board. So I can really open up that seam. Look at the difference that makes. That's the tacking on that's holding the tucks in place. It actually looks quite pretty. If I'd thought about that earlier, I could have actually done that in a more formal way, but that can come out before I stitch my cuff down. Let's tuck this little edge in there. So I'm going to just lighten some of these layers, take these away, trim back so they're not all at one level, and that will reduce bulk inside the cuff. Then we can go back and finish our sewing. And again, I'm going to use a stitch in the ditch technique to sew from the right side through to underneath. Right, so I've finished pressing and reducing all the bulk. You see anywhere there's corners, I've snipped them off. And I'm going to take the inside of the cuff now, fold it over the previous, just make sure I can feel that ridge underneath. So when I pin through into the ditch, I know that I'm catching in the underlayer. So just work my way along. So much about sewing is all in the fingertips. I wish I could bottle it and sell it, but it's just something that you have to develop for yourself. It's feeling the fabric underneath. And there you can actually see that ridge of the fabric. Again, using my finger just to push down from underneath. And pinning through. Final check. Right. This bit here. Now I could have stitched this when I first made the cuff. But I think what I'll do, I'll just slip stitch that little bit closed later. So I'm going to start my stitch in the ditch from this side, and then I can just stitch right the way down. Okay, so I'm lining up, getting my needle right into the seam. I can get rid of that pin before I start. Starting with the needle right in the ditch, a couple of stitches backwards, and because I've got the pins very close to where I want to stitch, I just take them out as I go, and I'm sort of pulling, again this fingertip thing, this pressure in your fingertips, just gently pulling and holding the seam open. Just checking that I can feel a ridge underneath. Oops, sorry. Just rearranging these layers here just to make sure that they're going to be lying the way I want them to once they're stitched down. Tucking that little lump underneath. That's our continuous round placket. Now, one problem is it tends to keep popping out to the right side. So as a final touch, go to turn it inside out, get your little placket piece, and we're just going to sew diagonally. Like that, so it's not going to be seen from the inside. It's not going to be seen from the outside. Actually gives a rather nice finish from the outside. So there is our finished continuous bound placket on a shirt sleeve with a lapped cuff. Now I do have alternative ways of finishing a sleeve opening. I think we have the faced opening or the actual formal shirt placket opening style. So if you want to see those, I'll put the links in the description if you want to have a check of these other videos. I've obviously always got the video on making fully automatic buttonholes and on sewing on the button. So until another time, see you later.